Hello, this tutorial will walk you through creating statuses as well as status management philosophy for your team. First of all, you need to log into Ricochet and then you'll navigate on the left-hand side to configuration and then click on status management, which will take you into our status management area. I'm going to show you here in a second how to create statuses and how to read this page to see what different statuses are set for. But first, let's just talk about status management strategy for your team and what you might want to think about if you're not sure if you want to start over with your statuses or make some changes. So the less statuses you have, the less chance there is for error. Having an attempting contact status, having a contacted status, having an application status, definitely having a do not call status, and then maybe having a contacted working status are the bare minimum. And some companies perform great with just having 5, 6, 7 statuses and that's it. Makes it easy. It's usually more accurate for the team with regards to knowing what to do. The more status you have, sometimes it takes longer for the team to find the status that they want, which can even slow down the calling process. But on the flip side, if you have a very sophisticated team, a very sophisticated product or sales pipeline, then you may want to get more detailed with your statuses. It is good, detailed statuses or more statuses that are detailed is good from a marketing perspective. So having a large amount of statuses can be good for targeted marketing. That way you can have emails and text messages and even dialer campaigns triggered that are hyper targeted to the specific status that the person's in. If the person saw something like a presentation but hasn't filled out the application, then you can have a very targeted email or text message that would go out as, hey, I know you've seen our presentation, but you haven't signed up. And those items can be advantageous, although in our system we do have the concept of manual tags. So tags can be used for email and text messaging. We won't go into that right now, but there really is no need to get a ton of statuses unless you really have a good reason for it. Okay, so let's create a new status first of all. We're going to click here on the green button, Add Status, and we're going to give the status a name. So we're just going to do Contacted for this status. If you want it to be active, you're going to select active. That's basically what you want. Really what this is more for if later you decide that you don't want a status. We don't really have the concept of deleting statuses because we still want to show what the status was on older leads. So maybe you have a status of contacted working and you've got 2,000 lead status as contacted working. Later on, you guys decide, oh, we're not going to use contacted working anymore. We're going to use something else. You can't delete it because you still, if you ever go to those other 2,000 leads, you're going to want to see that its status is contacted working. But you can make it inactive so it's no longer something that's utilized in the system to trigger emails or anything like that. So typically you're going to make your status active in 100% of the cases when you're creating a new status. You're also going to have it show in the pop-up. You can have statuses that are active that are not to be shown in the pop-up. And typically what that is reserved for is if you have a third-party system that is updating the status of your lead. Like for banks, maybe it is a third-party system that's moving your status into funded, right? Or for insurance companies, maybe it's moving it into some sort of underwriting status. These are not statuses that you would ever want your employees or agents to manually select, but you might want the status to be available for a third-party system to move it into that status through some sort of API connection. And that way you could see as a manager, oh, this particular lead is funded, but you know that an agent never moved it into that status. Okay, but again, typically 90% of the 95% of the time, you're going to have it show in the pop-up for the agents to select. What this basically means is that the agent can manually select the status at any time. This particular status is incredibly important. Stop calling, suspend, drip dial. What this does is this will actually move the lead out of our drip dialer. If you signed up for our services, you're probably familiar what our drip dialing service does. But a brief recap is when you get a new lead in, it's going to go through a drip dial cycle. This is typically reserved for companies that buy shared internet leads, or they generate their own leads, and it's important that they have a calling strategy over the first 2 to 3 days to call those leads. If you're a company that just uploads leads then the drip dial cycle is not as important. But nonetheless, this particular setting is very important. If this is selected, what it means is that when one of your agents or employees moves a lead or dispositions a lead as contacted working, it's going to suspend it from being called in our drip dialer. It's going to stop future calls in the drip dialer. Now, please note, you may still have a dialer campaign set up to call on this status. So it doesn't mean that the lead would never be called again. It probably means that, but some companies will go after leads that are in contacted statuses later on, maybe when they're a year old, for example, because it never moved into an application status. Now below, in a second, we're going to show you a better way to do that, where you can actually move the lead into a different status if a certain period of time has gone by. But different companies use different strategies. So the easiest way to describe this is it's going to definitely get pulled out of the drip dialer, and it will suspend drip dial calling if you have this selected. But it still may get called by a dialer campaign at some point in the future. Now, do not call, this is really exclusively for do not call requests. If this is selected, it will never get called again. You can't manually dial it. It's done. It's toast. You will never be able to call this lead again. Okay, so you typically don't want to set do not call unless it's actually your do not call status. I do recommend that every client has a specific do not call status because it is important. In fact, in cases, it's required that you have a do not call status and that you keep a do not call list. Okay, so moving on, webhooks. This is if you want to send the data, the lead information, and the status change to any third-party system when it is statused as contacted working. You would build a webhook, and then you would select the webhook in the drop-down here. Whatever that webhook may be will get triggered every time the lead is statused as such. Email notification. Some companies want to get emailed whenever a lead moves into a certain status, so the managers will know. This will send an email to every admin on your account. And some companies use it for return. So if you lead a status as return or bad lead, it emails that to the admin so they can manage a return with a third-party vendor. Hotkeys. This is one of the most incredible parts. I think there'll be another segment just about this, but what hotkeys are for are statusing leads by the press of a button. Hotkeys only work when a call has completed. So you're on a phone, your agent is on a phone call, they end the phone call and they go into wrap up mode. At that moment in time, they could press whatever this key is to status it. So let's say we make it a 2 or an @ sign, whatever that may be. When they select that key, it's going to automatically status the lead as contacted working, and then it's going to put them online to dial another lead again. So it's really, hotkeys are for transitioning between calls faster. Also, if you create a hotkey, you will see this status on the pop-up window of Ricochet, and users can click on it. They don't have to hit it on their keypad, but they can also click on it. So what we do recommend is create hotkeys for your most common statuses. Even if your agents aren't going to use the hotkeys themselves, they could click on those statuses, which are the most common ones, to, again, cycle through calls faster. Okay, everything on the right-hand side here mostly will go away. If you're not using a third-party CRM, then you don't need to worry about it, and we're not going to go over training for this, so go ahead and leave this blank for now. Now, moving on to what we call our status expiration. This is one of the most powerful portions of the system from a lot of clients' eyes and perspectives. This will basically expire a status. For example, contacted working is the perfect example. Often sales reps will land grab leads. So they'll call a lead, they won't get a hold of it, but they'll status it as contacted working anyways, because they want to take that lead for themselves and they don't want anyone else to get it or call it. 95% of our clients use the Shark Tank environment, so they know someone else is going to call it if they don't status it as contacted working. Be very careful to monitor your agents to make sure that they're not doing this, that they're not statusing leads as contacted working, even though they didn't get a hold of a lead. The good news is this status expiration will safeguard against it, but it's still detrimental for agents to do this. So what we typically recommend, you can come up with a time period yourself, it's in hours, but let's just say 72 hours for this example, which is 3 days. And then we're going to return it to the drip dial, and we're going to unassign it from the user, and then we're going to move it into a different status. Now, I don't have any other statuses to select here, but I would do that here in a second. Now, let's explain what would happen here. So what this is saying is, if one of my agents, status as a lead, is contacted working, they have 72 hours to move it into another status being app taken, or send proposal, or whatever other statuses that you might have. It doesn't matter what other status they move it into, as long as they move it into another status. Typically, you're going to know what other statuses would come after contacted working. But if they don't do that, if it's still in contacted working after 72 hours, which it typically will be if the agent is land grabbing leads, as we like to say, then it's going to automatically move the lead back into the drip dial. It's going to unassign it from that particular agent, so any other agent can start to call on this lead again. And then typically what we would do is we would select another status to change it to here. What I recommend is that you create a status called recycle contacted working, like that. And then you would select recycle contacted working in the change to status area here. So what would happen is an agent would status a lead as contacted working. After 72 hours, the status would the lead would go back into the drip dialer, it would unassign from the agent, and the status would automatically change to recycle contacted working, so that you guys can run reports on it, and oh, an agent status this is contacted working, but they didn't move it along the pipeline, and now it's been recycled into recycle contacted working. Okay, so this is a very powerful feature that safeguards agents getting a hold of leads and holding on to them for too long and nothing ever happening with that lead. It's going to move it back through the call funnel. Update status in external CRM. Again, if you're not using external CRM, you don't need this, and you don't need the update user in external CRM, and you don't need to put it on the do not call. And that's it for statusing.